So Zach, you were in the middle of talking about that first season and the challenges that you were facing.
I think we kind of left off with you know, the April camp of my first season, and just kind of feeling very very not confident and insecure. Just doing basic exercises on the move. And at that point, we had not moved very much. Through the winter process. So it was the first time we were actually like wearing the drums and moving around and kind of doing some drill. And I just remember it feeling very awkward and very uncomfortable for me. So I was in my mind, very nervous about, am I going to be able to do this? So that kind of stuck out to me, and then you move on. Because of course I was going to do it. Like I've been dreaming about doing this for years and now I'm finally in it. So there's no way I'm not doing this, regardless of whatever I'm feeling or thinking. Um, so then I think, as the season went on, something that sticks out to me is when we started our competition season. We had a show in Buffalo, New York, and it was the rematch of the Cavaliers Cadets tie from 2000. Which is these are two completely different drum corps at this point. With different programs, different memberships. Um, but anyway, DCI kind of marketed the opening of the season for those two drum corps as a show off or a showdown rather. So the two corps were in Buffalo, New York, at a baseball stadium, Dunn Tire Park. So it's not even a football stadium. Like the pitcher's mound is out there on like the 35-yard line, side one. Uh, but I remember, getting ready for that show and having such performance anxiety. The nerves, the butterflies were through the roof. And this was not my first time performing. As a high school student, as a middle school student, as a diver. I'd been in positions of competing and performing before, but there was just something about this drum corps thing, that kind of elevated it for me mentally, because I had put it on such a high pedestal for so many years. It was like, okay, the time is now. Here we go. This is your first show. And I just remember being extremely nervous, and kind of having to get talked down. Not that I was on a ledge of any kind of, but you're on the ledge there. You have these feelings. Like, it's like, I don't know if I can go out there and do this. And your teammates, your leaders kind of help you calm down and go out and do it. So I remember that kind of being something that I had to kind of manage through my opening season, was the nerves of performance. Um, I think, after all these years, the experience certainly helps subdue some of those things. But there's like, to this day, I mean, you still have, speak for myself. I still get those butterflies. It's more now out because it's out of my hands. I can't do anything. It's like, all right, get out there, everyone, and do a good job. I'll be rooting for you. But what are you going to do? You can't do anything. So it's a little bit of a different butterfly now, but they're still there. So yeah, that was something that I had to kind of battle my first season. Yeah.
Did you ever at any time have any type of imposter syndrome? Like, man, what am I doing here? Do I belong here? Anything like that?
I don't know that I had that so much. I mean, I felt like I, had like earned the spot and, deserved to be there. I mean, it certainly was, um, something that I would think about. You kind of lay down at night and fall asleep. It's like you're thinking, man, this is really happening. Like I'm doing this. So I don't know that it was ever really an imposter thing, but just more of kind of like realizing that the dream of doing this was a reality.
Yeah.
I'm triggered by the pitcher's mound because anybody that marched. I don't know if you ever came out for drums along the Rockies during your career, but it used to be at Mile High Stadium, and they had a pitcher's mound.
Oh man.
That was you just had to be like aware of. Um, the there's a lot of staff members nodding their heads when you talked about like being more nervous because you have the lack of control now as a staff person, and the performers just have to go out there and do it. Because you're right. That is actually the point when you have the least amount of control over the outcome. You just have to trust that you train them the right way, you know? So I totally get that.
And you mentioned baseball stadium, and for me, the first thing I think of, I don't know if they had it when you marched or if you had ever marched there. There was a show in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and it was in the outfield of some baseball stadium, and it's like you couldn't even hear your sound. It just went out, and then you get like a delayed response from the crowd. Mm-hmm. It was like the weirdest thing.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of those shows up in that area of the country, New England, upstate New York, we would have these small shows at these kind of interesting locations, a lot of which would be baseball stadiums. I remember, a few of those. And then like the angle of the crowd, it's like they're sitting they're in a baseball stadium. So they're sitting like this,
right,
and the way they have the football field positioned to like fit in a baseball field is, it's always kind of interesting. So I remember like the crowd always being kind of like angled oddly.
Yeah.
And actually the show that we have in Atlanta now is in where the Atlanta Braves used to play. So it's really a baseball stadium that's been converted into a football stadium, and it has that same. There's no pitcher's mound, but the
that
angle,
weird angle thing.
Yeah. So we do still have a show like that.
It's interesting how we remember like weird stadiums like that. Like for me too, there used to be a show in Sevierville, Tennessee.
Oh yeah,
there was like a big like hump in the you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember in 2002, like the drum line started on the very back sideline of the field, and you're looking up to the front where the drum major is starting the show, and I remember like thinking, I was like, I can't see the drum major's feet. The crown of the field was so massive that even like you lost sight of the front ensemble. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but I just remember thinking, man, this field is something else. It is not flat.
Did you guys win in 2001 percussion?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was pretty wild. Honestly, I wish that I could remember more from that first year. It's a little bit of a blur. And being, at my youngest as a member at that point, I don't know that I could fully really like take it in like I would be able to now. I remember it being really cool and everybody was really happy. And, it was certainly something that we had strived to, accomplish that season. But, it certainly wasn't something that was just like a given. And there were a lot of good drum lines that year, as there are any year. So to be able to kind of come out, on top was pretty cool, especially for my first go.
Yeah. Those lines at right there at the beginning of the millennium, the Cadets lines, they were, they won what, three drum trophies, 01, 02, 03, and what was the vibe of those lines like? As a member, were you guys like really pushing each other to be the best, or was it like a chill vibe, or how would you describe the vibe of those lines?
Well, I mean, as any team is made up, you have a lot of different people from a lot of different places, with a lot of different backgrounds. So, all those people coming together certainly creates a unique vibe. And, every year is different. For me, I was able to march 4 years. The guy that was the center snare, for all the years that I marched, minus my age out, because he had aged out the year prior. I mean, he had been there for 5 years. So it's like there were some of us that had, a good amount of time there to build the relationships and, consistency in the approach, with each other, along with the staff, the philosophy. And then you always have, people that are maybe one and done. I marched 1 year or I did 2 years. I came in for my age out and that was it for me. We definitely had all of those things, with the membership. So it was definitely different every year. I think, the Cadets, just the mentality, if you're going into it, there's a certain intensity that you at least perceive to be the way that it is. When you're there, obviously you kind of learn what it actually is. I think what I thought it was ended up being pretty realistic to what it actually was. But yeah, I mean, we certainly would push each other. Not just even in our own, sections like snare to snare, but I mean, I remember, bass drum vets like, on a reset, like reset, I'm going to beat you, like I'm going to get back there faster. We kind of compete with each other during the day, during the rehearsals to, who could get reset and kind of get in the quickest, who could, there were all these little games that we would play to kind of, one, get us through the day because it's, it's a lot of days, it's a lot of hours. But, to motivate and keep propelling forward, with the excellence of what the expectation was, that what the Corps had done previously for decades and decades, and our version of it, and you want to hold that standard, bare minimum. Like we certainly don't want to come out of this less than what everyone before us had done. So there's a lot of corps and teams before us that we were trying to live up to and make proud.
You brought up something that I wanted to highlight, and it's kind of leading me to sometimes I ask like really weird questions. But you talked about every year being different, right? I think some people would look at that era and think it was just every year was the same because you won every year, right? But from the inside that I'm guessing from the inside that it probably was different every year. Can you talk a little bit about, because one of the puzzles that everybody's trying to solve every year is how to win that trophy, right? You had the benefit of learning how to win that trophy different ways, maybe, I'm guessing. So was there anything about those 3 years where you guys did win that you really drew from as far as experience? And were they like really different from each other as far as like how the seasons played out and all of that?
Well, I mean, like I said, we never came out, and were like a force to be reckoned with, like from the get-go. If I think about, some like, Boston this past summer, I mean, we came out of the gates and it was like really strong and strong all the way through to the end. We were not like that. Any of the years that I marched, I mean, we came out and it was like, you'd get recaps and rightly so. You'd look at these recaps and it'd be like, oh man, what do we get tonight? Fifth, and it would be like one of those shows where there were 5 drum corps at it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Oh, we're last. So there was a lot of shows that went by where we were not, getting rewarded, and we weren't performing. We weren't performing at the level that we ultimately ended up getting to. So I think that was always the, once you win, it's like, okay, well, do that again, but then it's like, what are the things that ebb and flow every year? What's the membership? What's the staff? Are we set up? Who are we competing against? Is that drumline as good as they were last year? You know what I mean? There's a lot of different factors every year. It's not just, your own team. It's everybody else's team too, and how it kind of stacks up. Just in those years, we ended up being, really, really strong, especially when it counted at the end. But man, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. It was very physical. I mean, I think the drill got more and more challenging every single year. And I mean, you would think, oh, your first year, that's the hardest. Well, it was really hard. But then like, while I was a better performer my next year and my next year and my next year, it didn't make what we were doing any easier. You still had to work really, really hard physically, the mental stamina, the emotional toughness, all that, to try to kind of get yourself into a place that, your teammates can trust you and, you can trust them, and, kind of how to push forward and block out all the stuff that doesn't matter. only do what you can control kind of thing. Just live in that world.
Something
And I think,
that, go ahead, Jack.
well, I was just going to
Keep
say,
going,
I
Zach.
think that's always kind of what we try to do, no matter what the makeup was, where the members came from, what the experience was. We at least had our experiences from previous years to kind of like pull from, and like, okay, this is where we want to go. This is what has worked. So let's keep doing that, and then you fine tune as you go relative to what the situations are.
The thing that I was going to bring up, previously we had Angst on here, we had Jareed on here, and something that they talked about in the Cadets eras previous to yours was that almost like exactly what you described, where it was rare that cadets would come out of the gates on fire. It was usually like a lot of like a real uphill battle, and then at some point during the season, everything would sort of galvanize and coalesce, and they would make this almost like quantum leap forward.
Jareed would say that there's like, was it Hell Camp or
yeah,
something like that?
Like cadets actually, I don't know if they did it when you marched, but Jareed talked about there being a camp, where there weren't any shows, like during the season, where coming out of that was always like when they took that major leap forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we ever had a camp like he's describing. I mean, there's certainly parts of your tour where you've got less shows, and I think that's a strategic way about planning your tour. I mean, we certainly try to do that at Boston. I mean, it's, you get to a certain point, let's just call it kind of like maybe San Antonio, where it's like, okay, we've been working on this show up until now, and now we know we're going to make this change and that change, and we need some time to do those changes. We certainly don't want to be going into a week of shows, and try to tackle those things. You want to kind of be able to like go away, leave the competition field, leave the public eye, the competitive eye, change what you need to change, make it good. So that way, when you do present it, 4 days later or 5 days later or whatever it is, it's like, wow, that's a really good change, and you're really good at it. You know what I mean? So we certainly, have a way of doing that in mid to late season. So I think that's maybe kind of what he might be alluding to. But yeah, we would have things like that absolutely when I marched. I remember, hey, the end of the show is going to change. I feel like that's a big one for a lot of corps. Even to this day, it's like you get to San Antonio and it's like, all right, well, that's not the ending they're going to have at finals. So between then and at Atlanta or at Allentown, you're really tweaking some massive things, and then you kind of take it all the way out on that ending or whatever. But yeah, we would have times where we'd not have shows and do those things and kind of make these massive edits, but also massive growth, growth periods to the excellence of the corps.
Of the years that you marched, do you have a personal favorite show that you say, yeah, whatever, 03 was my favorite show of the year that I marched, or maybe Jethro Tull, maybe like Jethro Tull music? I mean, is there a favorite show for you?
Jethro Tull was definitely not my favorite show that I marched.
I'm glad you got the joke there.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I actually like when you listen to that music, there are some cool tunes. I really loved "Thick as a Brick." I think that was like our third movement or something. I just didn't love that particular show. I think 2003 was probably my favorite show overall to perform. It was definitely the most challenging show physically, musically. The book was crazy. The drill was crazy. That one was pretty fun to perform, but definitely taxing. I remember really liking the music from '01. The Young Person's Guide is a great tune. The ballad was absolutely beautiful from the movie Hannibal. Those kind of stick out to me. Even 2002, because it was a remake of the 1995 show. I still love the 1995 show more than the 2002 show, but it was kind of neat to kind of reprise that story in a different way. But yeah, I think '03 was probably my favorite one. '03, '01, '02, '04 in that order, probably.
Was John Burbank still on the staff in '02? Yeah, because he'd
Yes.
marched that '95 show. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And no, I remember that. Like George knows this. He and I marched together at in the Velvet Nights, like '93 and '94. But yeah, there's a whole story on that. But yeah, I was just curious when you brought up '95, and because I know he marched that, and then if he did redid the '95 show, if he was on staff there.
Yeah, and Eric Ward actually was the snare tech all those years that I marched as well, and he marched in the '95 snare line as well.
Yeah, sorry to get off on that tangent, and also sorry, I'm not trying to bag on the Jethro Tull show at all, but anybody who I've met that marched that year, it's like typically their least favorite year that they marched also.
Especially when they followed it up with the Zone, which was, one of those iconic cadet shows. It was, I was a little, I was jealous to have aged out, and then they did that one. That was a great show.
You brought up Eric and Rob brought up John Burbank. Was there any particular staff person during your time as a performer that was really impactful for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, the entire drum staff really was. I mean, Eric was always there. I don't remember a time when Eric wasn't there, honestly. I mean, I think the guy never left. He was just an unbelievable teacher. But him, I mean, John was great. Obviously Tom Angst, Neil Larrabee, like the team had been there for so long, with a couple of, edits as it relates to the tech team. But by the time I got there, the techs were the techs. So I didn't know any different. But I think the longevity, of that team during my time, there were a couple changes here and there, but for the most part, it was the same crew, which I think is valuable, to the program. If you're trying to do anything, having the same people in place for consistency definitely is helpful. Kind of building the philosophy, building the culture, and building on previous successes. I mean, it definitely helps to kind of have that backing. So, I think from my experience, it was cool to be a part of something that had that consistency.
You get done marching. Do you go right into teaching after that, or how did you get involved with the teaching part of drum corps?
Yeah, so while I was marching, I mean, like we already talked about, I graduated high school, did my first year of drum corps. So then, it was my freshman year of college coming up, and so I spent a semester at Indiana University of Pennsylvania out near Pittsburgh on the west side of Pennsylvania. And that drum line had a ton of drum corps people in it, a lot of crossmen, a lot of blue coats. It was a fun crew of people. But I was the only cadet there. And a lot of my friends from cadets were up at UMass, going and marching in the drum line there. And I missed them. I really wanted to, keep playing with them on a year-round basis. So I transferred the following fall up to UMass, and which is then when I, really kind of was introduced to Tom Hannum and Colin McNutt as teachers that would then, be lifelong friends and mentors and colleagues and kind of major parts of my life, guiding me into my adult, realm of doing this. So, I was a student at UMass, and, I was in the drum line there. And then at the time, Colin McNutt was with the Glassmen, and then he was at Magic of Orlando for a year, and then he was at Scouts. And so he was at Madison Scouts in 2004, which was my age out at Cadets. So I was still, a student at UMass. And actually, funny little tangent story. In 2004, we did the original Tour of Champions in California, right? So we had finals in Denver, And then, those 6 drum corps went out to Utah for like a couple days, and then we all went out to California, and we had a show at the Rose Bowl.
I was there.
Me too.
I was there in the stands. Yeah. I was there in the stands. Yeah.
And this was at a time when Colin was switching from innovative percussion to Vic Firth, and he was developing what is now the Colin McNutt signature snare stick that we use now. He was developing that stick, and I remember him coming up to me at the Rose Bowl, and he hands me this pair of Colin sticks. They were completely blank, no brand. Like it didn't. I don't even think it said Vic Firth on it. Maybe it said Vic Firth, and then there was like a V1 or something on it. It was like unsigned, unlabeled. It was like a stick that didn't exist. He was like, "Play with these." So at that show, I was using Colin's prototype stick.
Oh, nice.
And the rest of the snare line on each side of me had the maroon angst stick. So I always thought that was kind of a funny little thing that happened, and then if I look at my career after that, it's like, well, that kind of makes sense.
Do you still have those sticks, or did you have to give them back?
I think I gave them back. Yeah.
That'd be cool to see those if you still had those. Yeah.
But no, I think, my entry into teaching, after the Tour of Champions happened and I went back to school at UMass, Colin approached me about teaching the snare line at Madison for 05. And I remember I said, let me think about it for a day. Like in my mind, I was like, yes, of course I want to be the snare tech for the Scouts. But I kind of was like, let me think about it. And then the next day I called him and I said, yeah, let's do this. And then that was kind of that. I hopped on in really late 2004, when the new season starts in December or November, into 05. And then it kind of went from there.
That was a good line. The 05 Scouts line.
I think I've seen that. I missed a big chunk of drum corps. George knows this, but I think I saw that line on video on YouTube.
Yeah, that was the Carmen show.
Okay, then I did see that. Yeah.
Did you know that you wanted to go into teaching? Like if that opportunity wasn't presented to you after just aging out, would you have pursued other opportunities? Like, did you know I want to keep doing this and I want to?
I think at that point I did. Like, it's funny, when I first started marching, I thought I'm never aging out. I'm marching forever. I'm going to be at the Cadets forever. Like, this is my life now. But that's absolutely not the case. You do age out and, things move on. Right. So as soon as I kind of was getting into that final year of marching, it was something that I kind of started to think about, like, oh, wait, you know what? I am about to be done with this. And then what am I going to do after this? And, obviously I had enjoyed it so much. I kept going back. I'd wanted to march for a long time before I marched. So I definitely was passionate about it. So yeah, I think, in my, later years of marching, it kind of did come into my mind like, hey, I think I do want to do this. I do want to kind of move forward, as a teacher. I wasn't thinking about all the design things that, are now part of my life, but I want to be a snare tech. Let's go, absolutely. So it was kind of another dream come true when it happened that I could continue after marching, because that doesn't happen for everybody. There are a lot of people that I think, enjoy marching and want to continue to do it in some way afterwards. But not everybody has the opportunity to do it. So I'm very fortunate, that I was around the people that I was around, in the positions I was in, and was offered the opportunities that I was to kind of continue doing the thing that I loved doing.
It's cool now that you can, that people can specialize in things like just writing, doing, visual and movement, and or being a tech
instead of having to do
everything,
multiple things. Yeah.
Which is funny because I kind of do multiple. I'm like this. I live in this world of.
It's cool, but you don't have to just do everything. You can have other people come and and assist you. You're not just the one man that does everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Nor would I want to be. That's a lot.
I was going to point out that it's ironic that you kind of didn't remember that '05 Madison line, because the video I watched is your video that somebody had sent you, and I guess you digitized.
Yeah, yeah. I that's why I wasn't sure if that was the one that I did,
Yeah.
but yeah. Yeah. And darn it, George, I lost my track.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I do that all the time.
It's all right. Oh, no, I know what I was going to ask. Did you do any winter drumline at that time, or was that even a thing where you were at?
I like that you kind of followed up with that. I never marched indoor. When I was, in drum corps, like my high school program didn't have an indoor drum line. So I was really not exposed to WGI until it was really kind of too late for me to march. Now I could have marched probably 2 seasons of indoor had I really made that decision and sought it out and gone to an audition or whatever. But yeah, I was not exposed to WGI until really '03. I went out to Dayton in '03. I was 20 at the time, so like I said, I mean, you're almost done at that point with the age out. And I think obviously now we have extended the age a little bit, but back then we didn't have that extension. So I really didn't have a lot of time left. And also where I was living, whether it was where I grew up in Pennsylvania or if I was up at school in Amherst, I mean, we didn't really have organizations in the area readily available. I mean, even way back when, United wasn't really a thing. I mean, it was, 2 different groups at the time, hence the name United. But yeah, it just wasn't really on my radar. I wasn't exposed to it. There, we didn't have access, like we do today. So, I mean, there is a little bit of oh man, because I'm so heavily involved in WGI now. But I appreciate that I can be a part of it now, even though I wasn't able to perform.
I was going to ask, so thinking back on that video of Madison in '05, you're on that video, obviously, in the lot. And funny enough, it's almost like the style, the style of how the staff sort of interacted in the lot was very similar and very consistent with the way, they are now, like the way you guys are now. Who determined that? Like when you were like, okay, I'm going to do this job of jumping into being a snare tech. Who did you model yourself after somebody, or were you just or did Colin encourage you back then to be a certain way and to do the job a certain way that first season?
Well, I think it's, a combination of a lot of different people. I mean, at that point I had been a student of Tom Ungst's. I had been a student of all the teachers that I had prior to marching drum corps. But Tom and Eric, and that crew at the Cadets were certainly very influential on me. Then going to school at IUP, I mean, I met Chris Heston there, who was a great mentor there for me. And then up at school at UMass, with Hannum and McNutt, I mean, it's talking about some of the best educators, in the world for what we do, and just to kind of be able to have those people guiding me was massive. So I would say, I'm certainly my own person. I have my own style, especially after all these years, but my influences are absolutely, kind of based around those people. And with having worked with Colin for so many years, as a student of his, but also, at the Scouts and at Boston for all these years, I mean, you certainly, you pick up on, you read the room, you know what I mean? Like we kind of all know how to operate with each other. It's Colin's drumline, and we know that. We respect that. That's why we want to be there too. I mean, we love working with him. and we're all there to support the goal, support the main thing, and that's just to be as great as we possibly can be. And, he's our fearless leader, so it's like we take a lot of cues from him, from each other, from Tom. I mean, from Hannum. I mean, Hannum's really where this all comes from. I mean, Angst was a student of Hannum's, and so was Colin. And, I'll throw Lee Bettis in there too. I mean, I worked with Lee for many years at Crown and even at Madison. So he was also a student of Hannum's and Angst's, so there's a lot of, lineage that kind of stems down from Tom. So I would really say it's probably Tom Hannum, is the greatest role model for my vibe, because all of my teachers, including Tom, came from Tom.
That's a nice person to have to emulate.
Oh yeah, Hannum is he's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of percussion educators for what we do.
He is the trunk of that tree.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, you have the Tritoms, Hannum, Angst, and Float, and Hardiman, and then Scott, Skojo, and then Midwest, probably Jim Campbell. Yeah.
You mentioned Bettis. Is he how you ended up at teaching at Crown? Because you did Scouts 0506.
Yeah, and Lee was actually there. Colin and Lee kind of marched around the same time. Colin, whether he was at Crusaders or Vanguard, in those late 80s, early 90s years, and Bettis, at the same time was marching Garfield. I guess maybe his age out year, they had renamed themselves to Cadets of Bergen County, but, they were kind of peers at the time and started, teaching together, I think at Star in 93. So, they had a relationship, for a long time, as marching members of different drum corps, as colleagues, and then fast forward to, I want to say, I think 1997, maybe 7, 8, 9, 2000 in there. Bettis was at Glassman, I believe. And Colin was at Crossman with Hannum. And then those roles kind of flipped. Colin was then at Glassman and Bettis was at Crossman. And then fast forward a little more, and Colin now is in the Madison position, and he calls Lee to come in and be a consultant. So now the three of us are really at the same place. And that's kind of where I really met Lee. I'm sure I had met Lee previously, while I was at Cadets and he was at Crossman. We shared the same housing sites at Move-In, with those two corps being under YEA. But yeah, Scouts 0506, Lee was definitely there. So he and I, kind of started our working relationship there. And then in 07, Colin went to Cadets with Ian Moyer and sent us a message after finals, kind of saying that was what the move was. And then Lee ended up at Crown and called me up to come be the snare tech at Crown. And that's how that happened.
How long were you there at Crown for?
10 years.
Wow. So 07
that's a tenure.
2017?
16.
16, that's right. Because then 17 you ended up over at Boston, correct?
Correct, yeah.
That was a period of real growth for Crown overall.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of at least two drum corps were growing massively at that time. I mean, the Bluecoats and Carolina Crown, if you think about it, and maybe Bluecoats were probably a little further along at that point than Crown was, but I mean, those were two corps that you were not, like when I was marching Cadets, we were never thinking about Carolina Crown. We were never thinking about the Bluecoats. We weren't thinking about Boston Crusaders. They just weren't corps that we thought about competitively. We were thinking about the Blue Devils. We were thinking about Cavaliers, Santa Clara. That was kind of that. So when we got to Crown, I mean, this was a finalist drum corps, but nowhere near the powerhouse that they are today. So those early years at Crown, man, what a fun time it was to help build that program and organization, with some really, really talented teachers and designers, kind of getting that thing really to where it is today as a core that you do have to think about. If you're trying to get to the top, you do have to go through Carolina Crown. You do have to go to the blue coat or go through the blue coats, go to the blue coats. But the growth of those two cores in particular at that time was, massive. It was a lot of fun to be a part of that.
Were you also growing as a staff member with regards to like responsibilities? Because that's a long time to be there. Were you always just like purely focused on the battery or one section? Did that evolve at all during your time there?
Yeah, no, it absolutely evolved. Going into it, I was 24 years old when I started at Crown. I went in as the snare tech, which is a big job, but I wasn't thinking about, the ensemble. I wasn't thinking about, writing. I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. It was just teach the snares, make the snares as clean as possible. That's it. And then over the first few years there, the choreography thing really started to kind of become a thing, as I was talking about earlier. And then it kind of just turned into like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing the movement. I'm teaching the drill. I'm starting to kind of run the entire battery, not just the snares. Like I'd still be the snare tech, but now I'm coordinating the whole drum line. And then I would become, a percussion assistant caption supervisor. So then being the caption supervisor, to then starting to get upstairs and do percussion ensemble and music ensemble. So there was absolutely an evolution that occurred over my time at Crown, which really helped develop the skills that I have now to this day, that allow me to kind of have the career that I have, running around the country and doing what I do with whoever wants me to come in.
Do you like being on the field or do you like being up in the box? Do you have a preference?
I think the answer to that question is yes. I enjoy both. I certainly enjoy running around on the field, but I also really enjoy being upstairs as well. Having the skills to be able to do both, I think allows me to enjoy both. Certainly you want to feel like you're good at something and then do that thing, right? If you are insecure about doing something, you're probably going to shy away from it maybe a little bit. Those two areas for me are I feel completely comfortable and confident in my abilities. And the development over the years is given me that confidence to be like, oh, all right, I'm going up today. All right, cool. Hey, blah, blah, blah. And we're good to go. Or if you need me on the field, I can certainly go do that too. So I enjoy all of it.
I was going to say, you're no stranger to being out there running around following a drumline. Because the times I've been there, man, you are like in there.
Yep. Yep. Well, they're moving around. You gotta keep up with them. So